What's up, everybody? This is Ingram and Captain Jack, and we are the Minecrafters. And today we are here with episode 2 of Applied Energistics 2, where we're going to talk about how to build and set up your first network. We're going to talk about cables, conduits, controllers, cards, import buses, export buses, storage buses, terminals, crafting terminals, pattern terminals. You get the idea. Everything that you need to build your very first totally legit AE2 network.
Alright, so AE2 adds in 4 different types of cables into the game. The first one is Emmy glass cable, and that's the most basic, and these are all fluics here. The next one is Emmy covered cable. The next one is smart cable, followed by dense cable. Now, Ender IO also adds in 2 different types of cabling into the game, and the benefit of Ender IO is that you can combine it with other cables, which is fantastic. So the first one here is Emmy conduit, and the second one is Emmy dense conduit. Now, what is the difference between all these pipes? Well, this regular glass Emmy cable can carry up to 8 channels, as well as the Emmy covered cable, as well as the Emmy smart cable. However, if you mouse over the Emmy smart cable, you'll notice that it says 0 of 8 channels. And that's because it will actually show you physically, which we'll see in a second, how many channels are being used, and it will tell you when you hover over it. The dense cable can carry up to 32 channels, and it will also physically show you how many channels are being used. It's important to note that Emmy conduit can carry up 8 channels, the same as the Emmy glass, covered, or smart cable, and the Emmy dense conduit can also carry 32 channels, just like the regular AE2 conduit. Now, we won't really go into very much depth on this, but there are 17 total colors of these cables. That's including the fluics, okay? There's 16 colors plus fluics is 17. The colored cables will connect to the fluics, but the colored cables will not connect to each other, seen here, and that will apply to all of the different cables. Alright, so you can craft these things called cable anchors with a quartz cutting knife, shown here, and what you can do with the cable anchors is, A, you can fit up to 6 of them in one spot, so they are multi-part, and B, what they do is they separate cables that are the same color or same type from each other so that they will not connect. So if you see, if I place a cable up here, it will not connect to that other fluics cable, but if I place 2 adjacent to each other here, they will connect. So this is going to be really useful when you're like subnetting and networking in very tight spaces, and you don't want 2 cables to touch.
Cable anchors can also be used to craft these things called cable facades, and cable facades can accept any block in the middle. And what it'll allow you to do is create a very special type of multi-part block, which you can use to wall off and to kind of cover the different pieces of cable. Now, these things are smart enough to know that if, for example, you are trying to route a piece of cabling through them, they will automatically open up a hole, so you don't have to worry about the facade cutting off any of your cables.
Alright, next we're going to quickly talk about Quartz Fiber, and it's actually one of the crafting components in all the cables that we just used. And what Quartz Fiber does is it will transfer power from one network to another without actually transferring data or channels from one network to another. So you can see the cyan network is turned off over here, and that's because it has no power, and the red and green networks have power because they're coming off a controller here, which we'll be talking about in a second. If I place a quartz fiber here and then connect it with a cable, what it will do is it will transfer the power that's coming from this controller to this network while not actually connecting the cyan network to the other 2 networks, green and red.
Now, if you remember from episode 1, one of the ways you can access your inventory when you just have an Emmy chest is by slapping the top directly. It actually has an interface, or a terminal, built directly into the Emmy chest. But, as we discussed also in episode 1, you're going to start to very soon outgrow just an Emmy chest network. And so you're going to start using these things called Emmy Drives, which we've seen in several different locations here already. One of the things you're going to notice is that with a straight Emmy drive, there's no interface to access everything stored inside the Emmy drive directly. That's where these things called terminals come in. And there's a whole bunch of different terminals. We have a bunch of different ones here. There's 6 of them here. You have the very basic terminal, which is what's on the top of an Emmy chest. It just lets you have access to the items that are inside your network. The crafting terminal takes it a step farther to allow you to use the things in your network. For example, this piece of oak wood here. We can actually use it and do crafting recipes directly with the materials that are in our network. And the next level of that, of course, is going to be the pattern terminal, which we'll talk about more in episode 3. which allows you to do auto crafting and build different patterns. So we can say put 2 oak wood planks here, those yield 4 sticks, and we can encode a pattern with that that will allow our auto crafting setup in episode 3 to know actually how to make 4 sticks with 2 oak wood planks. Those patterns, once you have a bunch of them, are going to be put directly into this thing called an interface, which we'll talk about more in episode 3. But the special Emmy Interface terminal will allow us to actually access remotely from anywhere on our network all of the interfaces that are actually on the network. This one is currently labeled nothing, but we'll talk about how to modify their names later on. The next type of terminal that we're going to talk about is this thing actually called a storage monitor. And what it does, as you might expect, is if you right click on it with any item that you have in your hand, it'll show you how many of that item exists in your system. And you can lock that using a wrench, for example, the Certus quartz wrench from Applied Logistics. You can lock it, and then if you click it with anything else, it won't actually change the display. In order to clear the display, make sure the thing is unlocked, and then shift click the storage monitor to clear it out. And then you can put another item in, for example, to see how much of that item you have. The conversion monitor is an upgraded version of the storage monitor, which actually allows you to both monitor the storage as well as put items directly into your system or pull them out. To put items into your Emmy network through a conversion monitor, simply shift click and it will put the item in there. And to get all of the items of that type that you have in your inventory, simply shift and double click and it will put all the, for example, all of the cobblestone directly into your Emmy network through the conversion monitor. The pattern terminal, crafting terminal, and regular terminal also have a bunch of different sort and view options for you. You can sort by item name, sort by number of items, sort by mod, and even sort by the settings that you have in your inventory tweaks mod. The next tab allows you to actually configure what is being shown. You can show stored and craftable, just stored, just craftable, or both. Toggle the sorting direction with the sort order button. And if your GUI scale or GUI scale will allow, you can even change the terminal style to show a different number of items. Search box mode provides a bunch of different ways to actually automatically search your terminal. The key thing to take note of is where the little cursor line is for each of these different options. That will determine where the cursor is placed as soon as you open the terminal. So if we go into NEI synchronized automatic mode, it means that anytime we open up the terminal, the cursor will automatically be placed in the search bar. So if we go ahead and do this, we see that it's already placed up there. And NEI synchronized mode means that if I search something in my terminal, it will automatically also search the NEI pages seen here on the right. NEI synchronized standard means that the cursor will not be placed into the search bar when I open the window. Auto search mode simply means that when I come into the terminal, my cursor will be placed right into the search bar, but it will not sync with the NEI pages on the right, which allows you to have 2 separate searches going on at the same time. Each of the different terminals will automatically change their color based on the color of the cable that they are connected to. One caveat to point out about using the different Emmy conduits that are from the Ender IO instead of the Emmy cable from Applied Logistics is that you cannot directly apply an interface to them. As you see, they're going to flip around. They are not compatible multi-block parts, and so you cannot use them to directly interface with terminals. It's also important to note that the same thing holds true for the Emmy dense cable. You need to first come into a regular smart cable, covered cable, or glass cable. That is anything that only holds 8 channels. You cannot directly interface with something that holds 32 channels. They will simply not connect. While we are on the subject of multi-part blocks, let's just point out that all of the things that we're going to talk about in this tutorial, Emmy Import Buses, Emmy Export Buses, Emmy Interfaces, Storage Buses, all these different terminals are actually multi-part blocks that can all be put inside the same block. So it allows for very, very compact setups. You can actually even cover the different pieces of the network with those facades that we talked about previously. And the facades are smart enough to simply wrap around instead of blocking anything. They will simply wrap around and allow you to hide things like your terminals, things like your conversion storage monitors right in a wall without having any sort of ugly block sticking out.
Alright, so on a network without a controller, you can have up to 8 devices on a network, and each device will take up what's called a channel, and the channels can be displayed on these things called smart cables, which we've just talked about. So if I go ahead and place down a device here, which is an Emmy drive, it will take up 1 channel. You can see that there's a thin blue line on this cable that says it's taken up 1 channel. It's important to note that blocks like growth accelerators and this energy acceptor here will not use up a channel, so that's good. If I continue to add devices onto this network, you'll see that it will build up more and more channels. So right now it's telling me I have 3 channels used. There's a 4th channel. And when I put down the 5th block, you're going to get a new color. And that's going to fill in the spaces between the color that's already there. And depending on the color cable that you're using, these lines are going to appear a little bit differently. So you can have up to 8 channels used on a basic network. And if you try to add another channel to a network that's already full, it will break the entire network and you won't be able to use any of them. It's also important to note that the closest device gets channel priority, but that's only when you're using a controller, and we'll discuss that in just a minute. Alright, so here we have a rather unrealistic network with a whole bunch of different drives, and we're using all the cables that are available to us. Now we have a controller here. If you're not sure what that is, don't worry, we'll talk about it in just one second. But what we want to show you here is the channel usage throughout this little network. We have a dense cable attached onto the controller, and you can see that the dense cable has all of its channels used up. Now the difference between a dense cable and, let's say, a smart cable is that each line on a dense cable is indicating 4 channels. And it's only until you add a 4th channel attached to this cable here that that line will appear. So if you have only 3 devices coming off of a dense cable, it's not going to show anything until you slap that 4th one on there. Now here we have regular glass cable, and you can see that we can't tell how many channels are going through here, but since we can see the amount of devices on here, we know that this is being that this is using up 4 channels through this cabling here. And that's the disadvantage of using this crappier pipe and cabling, is that you can't actually see physically your channels. So we have 6 here, 6 here, as you can see indicated by all these nice little industrial information panels. Over here on the smart cables, you can clearly see that there's 6 channels being used up over here and over here. So you see there's 4 thin cyan lines, and then there's 2 lighter cyan lines. That's indicating that there's 6 channels being used here. And finally, with this Ender IO dense conduit, you cannot tell that there are any channels going through it at all. So if you do choose to use this stuff, just make sure you're aware of exactly how many channels are being used up on your network. If you want to break, let's say, the last piece here and slap on some smart cable, you'll actually be able to see how many channels are being used. And you might want to use that method when you set up your network if you're using Ender IO conduits. Alright, so for any network that has more than 8 channels, you are going to need a controller. And controllers are made by taking 4 sky stone block, 4 pure fluix crystals, and an engineering processor in a crafting grid just like this. And that's going to give you the Emmy Controller. And what's cool about the Emmy Controller is that it can carry, or it has a capability of emitting 32 channels per side here. So that's up to 192 channels for one single Emmy controller. So this is going to allow your network to be greatly expanded. All right, now one of the great things about controllers is that you can make them into multi-block structures. And as you can see by this design right here, the controller does not directly need to be connected to power. As long as there's power flowing through your Emmy network, it will power up the controller. And you can make this almost as big as you want, but there's 3 different rules that we're going to have to follow when building a multi-block controller. The 3 rules are that the max length of a controller can only be up to 7 blocks long. So this one down here at the bottom is already a full 7 blocks long, and if I go ahead and add the 8th block, it will break. The next rule we're going to have to follow is that no more than 3 controller blocks can be touching at any one time. So if I add one to the middle here, it'll be touching 4 different blocks, and that controller block will not work, as indicated by the fact that it is gray. The last rule we have to follow is that there can only be 1 controller per network. Now, if you're subnetting, that's a whole different story. But just know that you cannot put 2 controllers on the same network, or they will break and they will come up as red just like this. Alright, so it'll be important to note that if you follow the 3 cardinal rules of a controller, that you can build them to be absolutely huge. Alright, so there's 6 different types of cards that AE2 adds into the game, and they all do something different and unique. And you can craft the cards by making a basic card, so they're going to require a calculation processor, and the top one's going to require 2 diamond, the bottom one's going to require 2 gold. And here they are, and here's what they look like. On the top left here, we have an acceleration card, and that will make things move faster through some of your devices. The fuzzy bus will allow you to make things move through any device that can hold this card. And it will sort by like NBT and damage value if you wish. The inverter card almost acts like a blacklist or whitelisting card. The view cell that we'll talk about in a minute, we'll see that you can either invert or keep things normal with that card. Down here in the bottom with the basic cards, we have capacity cards, and that will allow more than the default items to pass through, let's say, an export bus or an import bus. Next, we have Redstone, a Redstone Card, and this is different from AE1, where all the devices came with Redstone Control. If you want your device to have Redstone Control, you're going to need this card. And finally, there's a crafting card, but we're not actually going to talk about this one right yet. We'll talk about that in the crafting and auto stuff episode. Whatever that is. I kind of fell off the wagon at the end.
Yeah, that's right. All right, before we talk about the view cell, let's talk about this thing called the network tool. The network tool is crafted using a chest and a dark illuminated panel, a wrench, and another processor. And that gives you a little bit of a hint as to what it's going to do. If we have it in our inventory bar and we click to open it, it'll actually give us a little bit of an inventory here where we can store all the different card types that we're going to be putting into our different interfaces, export buses, all that stuff. So it's a great way to store these cards for easy access. And when you actually open something that can use cards, you'll notice that as long as you have that network tool in your inventory, all the cards that are inside of it become available for easy access. The other thing that the network tool allows us to do is to see facades. And if we put up here in this corner, there's a little transparent facades button. And if we go ahead and click that, put it into transparency mode, we can see that all of our facades become transparent. So that's going to make it easy to access machines maybe that are hidden behind the different pieces of facade. You can basically look right through them. If you take it out of your hotbar, you'll notice that the ability to view facades goes away. Another thing the network tool allows us to do is if we shift click, we can use it as a wrench, and that'll allow us to rip pieces of cable off. It'll allow us to rip pieces of facade off. It'll even allow us to remove things like terminals and Emmy storage drives from our network without actually destroying everything in the multi-part block. And the last super useful thing that the network tool allows us to do is if we go ahead and just regular right click on any device in our network, including the cable or any of the devices, we can actually see how much power is stored in the network, how much power the network can accept, what our energy usage is, what our energy generation is, and all of the items, all of the interfaces, drives, everything that is actually attached to our network. Use the toggle up here to change between the different power units depending on what actually has value to you. All right, so let's talk about this thing called a view cell. Now, a view cell is a very special type of storage cell. It's a lot easier to create, and what it allows you to do is to filter your terminals to show you only specific things that exist on your network. And we're going to do this by putting the view cell in this thing called a cell workbench. And all you need to do to configure your view cell is to put stuff in this giant interface here. For example, if I put a piece of stone in there and I take this view cell out, it'll be configured to only show me stone. So if I go ahead in here into my regular terminal, I grab the view cell, I put it up in here. You can see there's a slot for all these view cells to go. And if I put the one that's configured to only show me stone, I drop it in there, and now all that I can see is stone in this terminal. If I take that back out, we can demonstrate one of the cards that we were just talking about, which is the inverter card. And if I go ahead and take an inverter card and put it in one of the card slots on my view cell, and again, pull it out to save the changes, go back into the terminal, put the view cell back, and now we're going to only see things that are not stone. So we just use that inverter card to make that thing actually like a blacklist, where we're going to blacklist anything on that view cell and show everything else. All right, so now we're going to talk about how to tie all of that stuff we just learned in this episode into one giant chain of awesome and build yourself an actual Emmy network. To start, let's talk about how to get all that massive influx of items that are coming in from your quarries actually into your Emmy system. Right here, I'm demonstrating two possible ways of doing that. The first, seen up top, is an Emmy Import Bus, which will import things into your Emmy network, and that's attached directly to an Ender chest. The second is a much faster implementation and actually uses an Emmy interface that's connected directly to a thermal expansion tesseract set to receive items. So, if I turn this lever, the two Ender quarries that I have running in the Deep Dark portal are going to fire up, and we'll see one of the limitations of the Ender chest with an import bus is that it fills up very, very fast. Now, of course, this is because I have speed 3 on my Ender quarry, but this is an example of one of the limitations of doing this method is that it fills up very, very fast, and the Emmy Import Bus by itself cannot handle pulling in items fast enough to cope with our Ender quarry. The only way to get our Emmy Import Bus to handle that level of speed is to put in these things called acceleration cards, and each acceleration card will give us a quarter of a stack per tick, and if we throw those in there, we can see that sped that import bus up a ton. The Emmy interface, however, doesn't have that limitation. the Tesseract will dump items straight into the Emmy interface, and the Emmy interface will dump them straight into our network. If we go ahead and take a look at our crafting terminal here, we can see all of the things that are in our little Emmy network that we have here. Each of these is on a separate network right now, and we're using the Quartz Fiber cable over there to split the power off so that each of these subnetworks can run without actually being on the same network. We can use the Emmy Toggle Bus that we talked about in episode 1 to actually connect both of these networks into the same Emmy controller. That Emmy controller will allow us to fire up a whole slew of other channels, and we'll tie all of our devices in together. Extending off of that Emmy controller, we have a bunch of different import-export buses set up with sag mills, smelteries, and all sorts of stuff that we are going to get into right now. This Emmy Export Bus will actually pump items out of our network, so it'll export things out of the Emmy network and into whatever it's aimed at. It's configured currently to export iron ore into this sag mill, which is going to go ahead and crush all the iron ore down into pulverized ferrous metal and iron. It'll put that directly into our alloy smelter, and then our Emmy Import Bus on this other side is going to go ahead and grab all of that stuff that we were just smelting, the dust into the iron ingots, and we'll import it back into our Emmy network. We can use the Emmy capacity card on an export bus to open up the number of slots so we can put a bunch more ores through the same export bus. The Redstone control card will allow us to have any sort of bus or device that's actually controlled by a Redstone signal. And if we can see, if we put the Redstone card up here, that this gives us this thing called Redstone Mode, which has a couple different settings. Activate with signal, active once per pulse, always active, that is, it doesn't require any sort of redstone, active without signal, so it'll only be on if there is no redstone signal, and of course active with signal. So if I go ahead and leave it on active with signal and turn on our lever here, we can see that this thing is going to start exporting some oak wood into our alloy smelter. The Emmy level emitter is like an automated version of that, which will actually allow us to control our different import-export buses based on levels of items in our system. So I have here set up a system that will use our Emmy level emitter, and anytime we have less than 64 charcoal, as noted here, Redstone Mode, emit when levels are below or equal to limit. So anytime our charcoal is less than 64, this level emitter will fire up. And we can see that our level emitter has fired up because we do not have enough charcoal in the system. This Emmy Export Bus is using a Redstone card to control itself, and so now it's getting a signal. It's going to export oak wood into the alloy smelter to turn into charcoal. The Emmy Storage Bus is a unique multi-part block added by Applied Energistics that we're going to talk about more in episodes 3 and episode 4. But one of the major uses that we use it for is to interface with other mods. For example, this deep storage unit is a very, very cheap way to store a ton of items. And if you see here, I have all of our cobblestone is actually going to be stored directly in this deep storage unit. The storage bus on top is configured to store all cobblestone in the device that the storage bus is attached to. So by slapping a storage bus onto a deep storage unit and putting cobblestone in that storage bus, that means any cobblestone that comes in from our quarries is actually going to be dumped straight into this deep storage unit. And if we open up this crafting terminal here and search for cobblestone, we can see that all of our cobblestone is actually being stored in the deep storage unit. Now, for those of you who have noticed that this has 10,000 items stored, but the deep storage unit here only has 6,500, the reason for that is because if you add the storage unit afterwards, for example, if you get 4,000 cobblestone and then add the deep storage unit, only new things will be stored in the DSU. Only new things will actually be routed through the storage bus. So you're going to need something like an export bus to export all of your existing stuff into your deep storage unit, or you can use the scrubber, which you may have seen in our Direwolf 20 Let's Play series. Last but not least, we are going to talk about the fuzzy card, and this is a great way to eliminate things from, for example, our mob farm, which we have back there. Notice the sausage links and the snowman and the slide into the cryogenic pool. And we are slaughtering mercilessly a ton of skeletons over here. And the reason for that is because skeletons spit out a ton of bows. And these things are going to clog up your drive. So look at all these different damage values. Each one counts as a different item according to ME. So one of the things we're going to do is grab any one of these bows. It doesn't really matter. Let's grab this one right here. Put it in our inventory. And if we go over, we have a storage bus, which we just talked about, attached directly to a trash can. And the reason that I'm doing this is because what we'll be able to do is say, put our fuzzy card in there. That opens up this fuzzy comparison. And if I put the bow in there that has a damage value, and say match any, that means any bows that have any sort of durability are all going to count as the same item. And that means that any new bows that come into this system are going to automatically get dumped into the trash. Now, as we talked about before, there is an issue with storage buses where they will not empty out things that are already in your Emmy network. So we still have all these bows in here. New ones will get trashed, but the existing ones will not. Thankfully, the Emmy Export Bus can also use a fuzzy card. And so I have a fuzzy card in here. And if I put it to match any mode, again, here's all the different modes, put it into match any, throw that bow in there, and the export bus I put to acceleration cards, and that is going to quickly clean out all of those nasty bows. And look at that. It already, there you go. It already cleared out all the bows that were in that system. All right, folks, that's it for Applied Energistics Episode 2. In Episode 3, we're going to cover auto crafting and a couple different things. And in Episode 4, we're going to do some advanced networking, so make sure to stick around. Thanks for watching, and stay poised.